Welcome to today's episode of Kescast, featuring Ricky again and Daniel. Today we're going to be talking about how language is used in politics and how perhaps over the years this language hasn't changed as much as we think it might have. Right, should we dive in? I think we're going to start talking about Donald Trump.
I think so.
Good fun.
Always fun. I've got an extract here from his inauguration speech, where he outlines the us versus them ideology that's reminiscent of the far right now. Not that I'm accusing Donald Trump of being a fascist yet. He specifies their victories have not been your victories, their triumphs have not been your triumphs, and while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. And it's the division between they being the establishment, I imagine, the Democrats for Americans, and us and the our and the your victories, being the people, in particular the working class people that Trump tries to appeal to. And so that ideology is, in a sense, quite a dangerous ideology in causing social division and a lot of resentment and anger in the populace. And that's one of the reasons he's such a populist leader, because it's easy to get behind him, because then you have a scapegoat, someone to be angry with.
Yeah, I suppose I could talk a bit about sort of what Trump does, especially because you were mentioning how he really sort of roots behind the people. So I've been researching on the link between French language and how this can sort of convey a sense of sophistication. And my fairly interesting findings is that in the case of Donald Trump, who I have studied, he actually uses very little French, about 20% compared to 80% Germanic, sort of Old English, Danish. And I think this is, obviously his public address is very unique in modern politics, but I think sort of this use is sort of almost trying to make everything seem a bit more conversational or more how the public would speak in everyday life, and I think that helps sort of the public to get behind him a bit more.
Yeah, I think French is quite a sophisticated language, or so we perceive it to be anyway. And Trump talks in quite simplistic sentence styles. His syntax isn't overly complicated. He's quite direct, blunt, straight to the point, regardless of what that point is. And it's interesting to realise that actually that's reflected as well in the roots of the language he uses. It's quite a more brash language, perhaps, than French, which could be quite flowery or quite enjoyable to listen to, perhaps.
It's interesting that, because I think one of the big criticisms that Trump gets is this sort of bluntness and sort of, these words that he just makes up and things like that. His use of language is often what he's criticised for. But at the same time, you can see, like you said, how it can gain him votes and gain him popularity because people see it as him, not putting on airs or they perhaps see it as him just being one of the people and not trying to be sophisticated. It's interesting.
That actually reminds me of something Boris Johnson said in his when he set himself up to try and be the next prime minister of this country. And he says in his address that the public feels alienated from us all as a breed of politicians because too often they feel we are muffling and veiling our language. And that's something Jacob Rees-Mogg has said as well, pointing out that he feels people just should stop being snowflakes. Something, lovely advice. And it's interesting to see how there's a rise of people on the right wing trying to establish themselves as one of the working class as a sort of member or a friend to the working class by trying to appeal using language and linguistics to try and present themselves as someone, oh, I'm not part of the elite because I talk like you, because I sound like you, and because I will say anything I want to, and therefore you are able to as well. And that's sort of idea with political correctness as well. People say, oh, I want to be able to say whatever I like, political correctness won't let me. And that's something Trump, Johnson, Farage, Rees-Mogg, they all stand against political correctness in that sense.
Okay. So I think you've both studied a little bit about Theresa May as well and how she uses language. Do you want to talk about her a bit?
On your point about left and right wing though, I just want to point out that the first person who starts dropping his T's and trying to get down with
He's
people...
right wing though, isn't he?
Well, okay.
Well.
Okay. He was claiming not, but it is Tony Blair in his estuary English. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Okay. Interesting.
And everyone else follows him, David Cameron most famously.
Blair was particularly good, regardless of whether you like him or not. At sort of taking his supporters on the left that he has as a member of the Labour Party, and then taking the people who should be his natural opposition on the right and in the middle, and convincing them that he knows what he's doing and that he's the right leader for the country. I think he's when you ask people who they voted for, most people who are traditional Tory voters will often say something like, the only time I've ever voted Labour was for Tony Blair. Or I only voted Labour for Tony Blair. I liked Tony Blair. He's the only Labour man I've ever liked. And he was good at that. He was good at finding support from places you don't expect it.
And do you think a lot of that was like due to how he used language? Would he have used language to do that?
Yeah. I think so. I don't have any of his speeches
Yeah.
down with me now, but he did drop his T's. He education. Hit the famous mantra. The use of repetition in political speeches and in all speeches is so important because repetition is used to help strengthen the listener's memory. When you hear something being repeated constantly throughout a speech, you end up associating it and bringing in other associations. And it's so much easier to believe in someone when you get a clear idea of their message.
It's like keywords, isn't it? Just
Exactly.
latch onto it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could add to that if we go back to Donald Trump again.
Go for it.
Yeah, obviously there are two words famously associated with Trump, which have just taken basically almost society by storm. That is fake news.
Indeed.
That was not even really a concept before Trump came about, I don't think. I certainly hadn't really heard it before he coined the term. And now it's everywhere. And I think, in a way, using that kind of language is almost dangerous because now that's been associated with the president and power, and it can always be thrown around to discredit what he likes, really.
There's a growing mistrust of media in society, but simultaneously there does also seem to be a rise in the spread of misinformation. Most famously, the bus, which had the slogan 300 million or 350 million pounds for the NHS following Brexit. There was no credibility to that at all, and the mistrust of the media rising from Trump saying, the CNN, they're fake news, and they're fake news because they don't like me. The New York Times, they're fake news because look at this article they've published criticising me. And it's therefore, again, it's part of that division, being able to divide people. So Trump can say to his supporters, you can't go and read the New York Times, you can't trust them as a newspaper outlet. And all of a sudden, you've got a mass turn-off. They'll go, people say, I don't trust your source, even if the source is completely credible, it's backed up, it's been well-researched.
Yeah.
And that mistrust of the media, the fake news, is being used by politicians to be able to spread ideology more than policy, perhaps.
I think Brexit as well, it's back to that keyword thing, isn't it? And sort of fear-mongering, because I know a lot of people now say, well, really, it was just a vote on immigration, wasn't it? Because that was the thing that was being thrown around. People were always talking about immigration, and, like you say, the numbers on the bus and all of this. It's all just people hear one keyword and just latch onto it.
And it's especially interesting the way people have taken immigration. You know, someone like Tommy Robinson can say, "Oh, I don't believe in immigration, but I'm not racist." When you look at the real things he said, and he says every single Muslim watching this, you have got away with killing and maiming British citizens, which is a quote from an address I think he gave to the EDL. You know, he'll say Islam is not a religion of peace, and then he'll come out and say, "But you can't call me racist." And it's that use of being able to deny almost the truth in one sense, and then stand up and be like, I don't agree with Muslims, is essentially what he's saying, and use the idea of being able to, of free speech, to defend that statement and his earlier statement of not being a racist. And you know, it's that sort of danger with the immigration. You know, are we perhaps normalising bigotry, or are these people really just standing out against this political correctness?
Interesting.
It's a hard line to walk.
Indeed.
I think.
Go for it.
I think you can get behind common ideas, and I mean, like you said, no one wants to be depicted as racist, and yet at the same time, you can still sympathise with your audience in an effort to try and get them to like you more. And so it's that's been used a lot in all sorts of political speeches. People just try to adhere to like what the people want in an effort to get the votes.
Yeah, and then
So
not
you look
necessarily follow up.
hard-working families who are always found up and down the countries.
Oh yeah.
And then the jams as well, just about managings. And they're all the groups who are always checked off on the tick list of who you want to sympathise with you in your political speech.
Yeah, dropping names basically.
Yeah. It's essentially that. But language is used to either attract an audience and be more attractive, but it's also used to attack opposition, and in the same sort of vitriolic use of language to try and spin yourself to always sound like you're on the side of righteousness, you're on the moral side. I think Owen Jones tweeted after Theresa May's resignation, he tweeted that Theresa May didn't break down publicly over Windrush or Grenfell or disabled people having their benefits cut or children driven into poverty. In the end, she only publicly shed a tear over her own career. And it's that focus then on using the repetition of or to make it seem like there's this constant list of people that he's insinuating she herself has caused problems for. And whether he's right or not, he's managed to use language to make it sound like she's sort of a villain who's trying to make herself seem like a victim.
And yet, that's another thing that people tend to sort of name check as well. It's our country, like the country, the land, and obviously because so much in politics, it's almost like the race to get there. It becomes like the race of an individual, doesn't it? It's like everyone's out for themselves. I mean, especially looking at the situation that this country is in at the moment. And then, when you look at these speeches when they're actually in power, suddenly they've remembered they're doing this for the country again. And
The being able to say I work for our country makes it sound like everyone is united behind you. Theresa May said when she came into power that she had a mandate to deliver Brexit for the people. Well, 48% of people don't want you to deliver Brexit.
Yeah.
But she makes it sound through just by saying the people, as though they're a unified whole, as though she's got much more ground to stand on, much more support than maybe reality would suggest.
Indeed. Did you want to talk about what you found when looking at Theresa May's language?
So like I said, I've sort of been researching the link between French and politics. So Donald Trump and Theresa May are not actually too different in terms of their French use, although it has to be said that Theresa May uses 7% more French from my research. But I think that much is enough to make a difference. I think in British politics, there's more of an expectation to uphold a sense of sophistication, which I think might not be perceived as much in American politics, because British politics has been going on for longer, and we've sort of developed our own stereotypes of what a politician should be.
Yeah, it sort of has its roots in a slightly different place, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Do we want to talk about maybe social media and how that has changed, maybe aided, maybe hindered political language?
Yes.
Yes,
I would love to talk about it.
Go for it.
You know, social media, and I think the most political platform, if you had to narrow it down, would be Twitter. Most politicians are on Twitter. The 2017 election, the general election, could be described as the sort of the social media election, where the sort of the rise of people being able to use Twitter to quickly just sort of get across headlines, quick facts, to sort of encourage people, and often they're I don't want to say extremist, but they're facts that are more likely to swing people than more detailed explanations possibly would. People like Momentum, the support for the Jeremy Corbyn sort of support group, use Twitter a lot to try and gain more popularity. And Jeremy Corbyn can be described as a populist leader in the way he runs his party, in that membership has increased by 200%, but the MPs who work alongside him seem to be sort of leaving in droves. And there's a divide there, and I think that's in part caused by social media. Sort of the difference between membership and MPs has been emphasised by the way in which his supporters use Twitter.
You were mentioning, specifically Twitter. I think the way that Twitter works with its character limit, 120. I don't use Twitter.
240, I think.
240. You have to get you have to be a certain level to get 240. I think, I'm not sure, but my point is that it's quite a limited character limit, and I think that makes Twitter really the perfect place to throw around these buzzwords and catchphrases that really drive home sort of your ideas and who you're aiming to get votes from.
And like you say, it's these sort of headlines as well, because social media is all everywhere, and then TV, newspapers, all that as well. We have all of it. Like, people are very likely to just see a headline and then not click through or not turn the page to read the rest of the article. They just take the headline as, for what it is.
It's so easy to just scroll down and see something quite exaggerated and just click like and keep moving. And it's the same sort of tactics that newspapers like The Sun, which I loathe to call a newspaper, and the Daily Mail and the Daily Mirror as well have been using for years. But with the decline of newspapers and the rise of social media, you can see the language is just switched platform, but it's the same language that's being used.
And the pure volume of it.
Yeah. Use of capital letters.
Yeah.
Exclamation marks to really drive. And Trump is very well known for his use of Twitter. Sometimes you have to look at it and go, is this Trump or is this a parody account? You can't tell.
Very true.
And when he says sad at the end of his tweets with that exclamation mark, it does drive home this image of just maybe in Britain in particular, where we particularly don't like it. Whereas in America, he's got a lot of popularity for it. And I think that's to do with the fact we expect more sophistication from our politicians.
I think, sort of linking into what you were saying earlier about Jeremy Corbyn, but it's almost like, social media has sort of allowed this sort of tighter link, I guess, between members, like membership and like the people and the MPs, because you sort of feel closer to them. Like if you follow them on Twitter, it's like,
you can PM them, send them a private message, and all of a sudden you're in direct conversation with this person who 10, 20 years ago you might never have been able to meet in your life. You might never even, I don't know, depending on who they are, you might never even have seen them in your life, an image of them.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting the way social media has sort of come out of sort of the TV age of elections. for the 2015 general election, 38% of voters said they were influenced by the four big debates. And before then, you had the radio was used to get messages out. Roosevelt had his fireside chats. There's politicians have always tried to find a way to have sort of an intimate relationship with the electorate, the voters, in order to try and convince them that they're on our side.
Yeah. Okay. I really want to bring it up, but obviously that famous Trump tweet, the Kafefa tweet.
So glad you brought it up.
Yeah. What do we have to say about that?
Well, I think I'd love to see a definition of Kafefe.
Indeed.
Yeah, and it's the way that's spiraled out of control that's most interesting. in that people have taken it, and it's something so easy to mock and humiliate. It really is, and you sort of sit there going, "Can I make fun of this?" And yes, you can. But in America, I think it's looked at very differently, and people who do make fun of it perhaps have said, "Oh, well, you're just hating on Trump. You'll just hate anything he does." When actually, is it poor use of language, or has he managed to convince even more people that he's only being lambasted by the media, and that actually he's an all right man? Is he being able to spin this in such a way that anyone who says, "Could you just learn how to spell?" is actually seen as the sort of the villains of the piece? I think that's quite a scary world to live in, actually, where asking for basic language skills is something that we're not expected, our politicians aren't expected to have. And
Indeed.
Trump is obviously, he must be very, very clever. But I'm not sure if it's clever in the right way, in the moral way.
In the sort of way, or the way that we want. And certainly that links into the use of French, like even we're not even aware of it necessarily. But somehow we hear someone using these particular words, and to us it suddenly seems more sophisticated, even if we can't.
They sound professional.
why.
They sound like someone we can agree with.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to say anything to finish off, or?
Just, I think the most interesting thing to me about political speeches is how similar they've remained, and how the leaders we like the most and we appreciate the most are the leaders who use language to make themselves seem like they're on our side. If you go all the way back, you've got people like Churchill and Hitler managed to make themselves more powerful by presenting themselves as on the side of the people. And that's something I think our politicians strive to do today. That's what I find most interesting about it.
That's good.
Yeah, I'd say probably be careful what you read and what you hear, because politicians are always out there to try and get your vote, your support.
Sorry.
Yeah, was it Orwell? I think he said that it didn't matter what politician you were; it was always to try and get the same point across. Like they could try and make murder acceptable, and they all try to do the same sort of thing. And I mean, obviously, my research has sort of concluded this has gone all the way back since 1066. So perhaps things haven't really changed. I think the media, or the medium through which they're being accessed nowadays, has obviously changed.
Yeah. Did you, when you were studying the language, did you look at social media, like tweets and things as well, or just speeches?
Yeah, I did run through a few tweets, because I was trying to get an element of conversationalism as well as sort of public address.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing that I found is that after like the first 2 or 3 speeches, you really found like a consistency in the top 15 or so words. And to be honest, adding tweets in didn't really make too much difference. So to me it seems like how people are trying to get across to their audience doesn't really change too much through how they try and do it.
It's almost like hypnotism, isn't it? You say the same thing over and over again, and eventually people just have to believe it because it's the only thing they're hearing.
Yeah.
Brexit, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, which doesn't explain anything at all, does it?
It
But
doesn't.
it's wonderful. It's like opening the dictionary and being like, I'm not sure what this word means. Oh, it just means that word. Wonderful.
Right.
Perfect.
Enlightened. And it's one of the things I remember, because I did history at GCSE, and I remember saying, well, hang on, they're fascists, but Nazi was short for National Socialist Party.
Yeah.
I was like, why was socialist in there? And my teacher went, oh, just to get the votes.
Yeah.
That's like, that's literally,
You know,
literally just throw a word in there because people will hear it and go, oh, okay, I know what that means. They must do this.
Hitler
And
branded
question
himself
it.
the destroyer of Marxism, and then went off to call himself a socialist.
Indeed.
And you go, is that free speech, or is that lying, or is that normalisation of bigotry?
Indeed.
And
Yeah.
obviously he was a horrible, horrible man.
Absolutely. Heard. That's good. Is that a good note to end on? I think
think so.
probably is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much and well
Thank
done.
you.
That's very good.